All right, welcome everyone to the Kubeflow Pipelines community meeting. Today's date is January 29th, 2025. This meeting is governed by the CNCF Code of Conduct. The meeting is recorded and will be uploaded to the Kubeflow YouTube account after the call has ended. So just to start off with some announcements, Kubeflow 2.4 was released, I believe, last week. There's a link to the release notes and the release itself in the notes over here. So in this release, we switched to GitHub Container Registry as a source of images. And this is also the release that will be going into the next Kubeflow release. I don't know what the timeline is there for GA on that. Ricardo, maybe you or somebody else has that date. Are we still in RC?
We're still finishing feature freeze because we have a problem with syncing manifest for pipelines, not related to the pipelines itself, but it's also one of the platform components. And there's also 2 or 3 more working groups that are still finishing cutting their releases. We expect to do this by the end of this week. But yeah, congrats on the new release for Kubeflow pipelines.
Awesome. Thanks for that info. So there are changes that need to be made to the release notes because the process is now slightly different. So we're not using G Cloud or Google Cloud anymore for making our images. So that needs to be updated. I'll provide an update for that. There's a PR. It's in work in progress because of the Tecton code broke, and I don't know if you want to fix it because we also want to remove Tecton in this upcoming release. But this is our Chen. If you could take a look at this, it's a pretty quick PR. All it's doing is it's setting the launcher and driver to be latest on the dev branch, but we're also in manifests we define it as a release target with a tag. So if you check, there'll be like an overlay, and we can provide not this one.
Cool.
So
I'll take a look.
just take a look, and if we just provide the tag within the YAML, and in the code we'll set it to latest. So if you can take a look, and just this way we don't have to create a build before we start the builds for the other images. We can just do all the images at the same time, and we don't have to do any manual pushing. So it would be nice if we could do things this way, but I don't know how folks will feel about hard coding latest in the code. So yeah, just take a look, let us know, and if we're happy with it, we can merge this, and I can include that in the release note updates. I think that's all I have. Next topic is from Ricardo.
Yeah, just getting back to the TTL proposal, we decided last meeting that there was a pending topic that was raised by Chen. I believe addressed that thing. So yeah, Chen, just let me know if you had the chance to take a look at it. See if that's enough for you to answer your questions. And yeah, let's then discuss next steps on the TTL proposal.
Yes, I look at your comment. I think that looks good to me. Yeah, I'll write some comments. I'll reply in comments, but overall looks good.
Awesome. Great. You also have the next topic?
Yeah, I got this issue raised. Well, actually, it was a Slack message I got. I got pinged yesterday, I guess. And I noticed that this is an issue open 2 years ago, and it looks like to become a bit critical. And I would say it's part of the work to make SDK to have some feature parity with D1. So I'd like to discuss whoever has a good history about this issue, if there's something that we should maybe propose for the next release of KIP, or yeah, just looking for some faults here. I'm looking at you, Chen.
Yeah, so this, I believe in V2, we did a SDK change to support the DSL.collect, I think is to aggregate the output from parallel 4. And that work requires backend changes. We never had the bandwidth to do this in KIP backend. We only did this in KIP SDK and Vertex backend. I think so. As part of these changes, we probably I think stopped like a workaround like this after workaround that used to work in V1, but I forgot the exact reason, but I think we might like intentionally stop this workaround. I saw the issue they were mentioning this works in 2.5 and start working starting 2.6. That might be when the change was introduced. Ideally, I think if we have resource, I think we can implement this DSL dot collected in KIP backend, and then people they don't need to rely on this workaround.
Okay, so the SDK bits are done. We just need to.
SDKs are done, and then the backend is missing. So because it was missing, I think people in V1 they were using their own workaround, which is probably not the intention we want how the user uses after syntax.
Okay. Okay. We can add this for 2.5. This looks like then it's like I definitely want us to start prioritizing the stuff that we have in the DSL that's not implemented in backend. So we can bring parity with what's in the API.
I just saw in the chat that Michael also volunteered to take a look. Maybe you could assign to him as well.
Okay, that's great. Michael, would you like me to add you as an assignee for this? Or I guess Connor, so I'm gonna remove Connor. I don't know what I forgot what your GitHub is. I think you have the ability to self-assign, so you can do it if you're up for it. And cool, awesome. Let me add it to the meeting notes as well. So Chen, SDK bits are implemented, just need backend included in 2.5 milestone. Okay, cool. Anything else regarding this topic?
No, I'm good.
Awesome. Matt, you have the next one.
Yep, I can share screen, but it says you need to stop sharing first.
Yeah, okay. One sec.
All right, so hey everyone. So last meeting I showed a proof of concept demo of the Kubernetes API for pipelines and pipeline versions. And then this is just the formal proposal. It's in the format of a KEP, Kubernetes enhancement proposal, because that is what is proposed to change the format to. But there's a PR that's still open for that. So I'll just quickly talk through some of the motivation and the plan, or what I'm proposing. So really the main motivation is that a lot of other components within Kubeflow have the ability to perform GitOps operations with a tool like Argo CD when they're defining things like a PyTorch job, and there's other examples, but it'd be nice to bring that level of parity to Kubeflow pipelines, and specifically right now targeting the pipelines and pipeline versions, but in the future also being able to trigger runs through the Kube API would be pretty nice. So it's the goals really here is to be completely backwards compatible, but allow a user to be able to use a Kubernetes native API if they want to, and it's opt-in. So the proposal is to add 2 custom resource definitions. The first one being the pipeline kind, which directly maps to the pipeline table in the SQL database today. And then the pipeline version also maps directly to the pipeline version table in the SQL database today. So the user would first define the pipeline in the same namespace. Then they would specify the pipeline version, and they would reference the pipeline name here that this is a part of. And then they just put the pipeline spec, which is the intermediate representation that comes out of the Python SDK here. And then after submission, there's a mutating webhook, also a validating webhook that gets executed, but the mutating webhook adds an owner's reference. So that way the pipeline version is owned by the reference pipeline. And then also the CRD has some defaults for status. So it gets the status of ready after submission, which is similar to what the REST API does today. The validation is also the exact same as the REST API. So it validates that the pipeline spec is valid, the name of the pipeline version is valid, and then it references a valid pipeline as well. And the technical implementation of this is, like I alluded to, webhooks, so that we don't have to have a controller, another controller. The benefit of using webhooks is that it's API request time, so the user gets a very similar experience to using the REST API, where if their pipeline spec is invalid, it'll just reject it rather than let it go through. And then there's a status that gets added later or something by a controller. So by having as a validating webhook, you get that same experience. Same with mutation, where like adding the owner's reference and the status, it just reduces any kind of delay that you would get. So, and then additionally, the other aspect of the implementation to make this backwards compatible is that it would replace the pipeline store interface. Well, it'd be optional. So you could specify a flag. Let's see where I show that. Oh yeah, here. So you can specify a new flag of pipeline store that defaults to database, but you can choose Kubernetes. So the rest, if you call through the REST API, it's really just calling Kubernetes under the hood. If you set it to Kubernetes, so it's completely backwards compatible. The UI will continue to work as I showed in the demo last time. And trying to think what else I might bring up. Maybe while I keep thinking about it, are there any specific questions on this proposal?
So what about if we're using webhook, how will we reconcile multi-namespace installs?
Oh yeah, so the webhook, I think I have it somewhere in here. Yeah, here it is. So there's so when you define a validating webhook configuration object, you have multiple entries for webhooks, and there's a namespace selector for each webhook entry. So the idea here is that if you have multiple installs on the cluster, you would have an entry per instance in the webhooks array, and the namespace selector would just select that particular that particular namespace that you're operating in. And this is for like multiple standalone installations on the same cluster. But for multi-user, this wouldn't be an issue. You just have the one entry because you have one API server that handles all namespaces.
Awesome. Any other questions?
I guess I did want to bring some of the downsides. Well, I was trying to find the section for it. Okay. Yeah, I think some of the downsides really is the migration. So if you're migrating from database to Kubernetes native API, the UIDs are going to be different because we're leveraging in the API server, the UIDs are automatically generated as you create the pipeline or pipeline version. And here we're relying on the UIDs from Kubernetes that are generated. And so the unfortunate part is that like your existing pipeline runs and stuff like that won't be linked to the pipeline version after you migrate. And I think that's okay because the alternative would be to allow the user to specify a UID. And we don't really want to do that because there's no guarantee that they didn't modify the pipeline spec as they did the migration. So it'd be kind of like a one-time issue. I suppose you could modify the database directly to change the UID references, but probably not great. And then the other thing I wanted to mention too is that sorting and filtering is pretty limited on the Kubernetes API. So when you're using the REST API right now, you can sort by certain fields for the pipeline version. You can sort by different fields. And this is getting a little bit better in Kubernetes 1.31, where you can have selectable field support in CRDs. So we could specify which fields you could filter by, but we're supporting older versions of Kubernetes as well. So it's not something we could rely on. And then also sorting is not supported as well, as far as I could tell. So the REST API server will have to kind of do client-side filtering when the user specifies these sort and field selector options. So that is one of the downsides, that if you have a lot of pipeline versions for a particular pipeline, it could be slow because essentially you have to query for all of the pipelines in the namespace or pipeline versions in the namespace. So that's one of the main downsides of using the Kubernetes API server.
It feels like it would hit really hard if we were to do this same thing for runs in the future. You typically have a lot more runs, right?
Yeah, and my view on runs is that it would have to be a different design. Like I've seen Ansible, for example, they have the concept of like an Ansible job that you can create, and it's essentially just like a proxy to the Ansible automation platform instance. And then you get some kind of status reported back, and then eventually those Ansible jobs just get deleted. They get pruned automatically. So that's the approach I would suggest for runs, but I didn't want to do that syncing here necessarily for pipelines and pipeline versions, because you would get a lot of, I think, sync issues based on like what, basically I don't want two sources of truth is what I'm getting at. Whereas for runs, I feel like if we're very upfront and we're just like saying it's essentially a request that gets forwarded to the API server to start a run, I feel better about that for that specific use case.
Okay, and if a user was to switch from in an existing installation, if they went from database to Kubernetes, Kubernetes, their previous runs would essentially disappear in the UI, right?
I think they would be there, but it'd be the equivalent as if you deleted the pipeline version. I think it shows a little warning sign saying that it's like missing the pipeline version.
Yeah, and the execution and artifacts pages would continue to list for those pipelines. So it's a consideration. I don't know how we would want to handle that, but I think Personally, I really like this approach. I think the migration stuff is where we'll probably have to pay extra attention to, or at least like note it or document it. Any other questions for Matt?
Yeah, go ahead, Chen.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious, like how many users, Kubeflow users you see, like they prefer more like Kubernetes like native API versus like users they don't want to learn more about Kubernetes. I guess maybe Red Hat may have a very different like user base than Vertex. Like from like our past observation is like there are users they don't really want to learn about Kubernetes. They prefer some like generic interface. Versus there, I'm pretty sure there will be like diehard like Kubernetes fans. They want everything in control with their familiar kubectl tools, etc. I'm not sure the balance there. Like I think for this maybe as an experiment is okay. Whether like we go down this road for run, etc. Might be. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I mean, we're a little bit biased, I think, on the Red Hat side because we've been so invested in Kubernetes for everything. And so some of our, some people that we've talked to who are pipelines users are already like doing everything through GitOps, like Argo CD. And so they want to continue doing it that way for other aspects. So like if they're installing Kubeflow pipelines with Argo CD, they would also like to just apply the pipelines and pipeline versions if they're like deploying a new cluster or something like that. But the benefit of this proposal is that the REST API continues to work. So users that don't want anything to do with Kubernetes just continue using REST API. And that's the case if you enable it or just keep it today, right? If you enable the Kubernetes approach, like the REST API will just translate the calls to the Kubernetes API for you. So it's kind of friendly for both users.
In the prototype that I saw, the underlying implementation. So there's like the initial design for how it was implemented for pipeline store was luckily done in such a way where we could easily just implement an interface that adds this support. And it's very like there's not a lot of resistance. It seamlessly fits in with the current design on how everything has been coded. So I don't think there's like much refactoring needed to support both. We just provide an interface for the Kubernetes support, and that should be sufficient.
Yeah, I think sounds good. I think we can use this as an experiment maybe.
Yeah. We don't need to like deprecate anything. We can add these two options, and as Chen said, we can try it out and yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, it'll be like a feature gate behind the pipeline store flag that you pass to the API server, and I'll just continue defaulting to database. So for existing users, they won't see a change at all. It'll just be kind of opt-in. Daniel.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up one other, I guess, consideration with this, which is that I've seen in a couple production environments where companies will use an outside database, and the reasoning behind that is so that they have failover in case the cluster goes down. They can bring up a new cluster, point it to the same database, and have all their pipeline and run information there. So I don't know if that's a issue for everyone, but that's something I think that we want to keep in consideration is just easy failover and making sure that like information is preserved. This can also be important for like audits and stuff like that. Just having those same IDs and things.
So my personal opinion on that, currently the database approach is very limited in terms of users availability because we only support MySQL and MariaDB. Uh, of course, users will still want to have a database behind, but having another option like an EDI server, just like Matt proposed, would be great. And I believe this an extension to that discussion, maybe think of other um, database vendors we could support in terms of uh, for a backend for KFP. But at this point, I feel like this is a good thing because it just adds another option for users to store their pipelines data into KFP.
I think it's also important to remember that from like the individual, the data scientist that's writing pipelines and submitting pipelines, everything looks the same. This is more a MLOps concern where you are more concerned with how things are looking inside Kubernetes. And a lot of teams, what they'll do is they'll have the data scientists that are writing the pipelines and they're submitting their pipelines. Then you have your MLOps that's maintaining the platform, and they might have a strong opinion about whether this information is being stored in either a SQL database or whether they want to utilize GitOps instead. So that's the different. I think I see those as two different personas. Nothing changes from like the UI perspective. You still submit a pipeline. You can still submit a pipeline via the CLI, the API, all of that. The functionality would still remain exactly the same.
But yeah, to your point, Daniel, I think the proper approach, if you want all the UIDs to remain the same, is that you would have to back up etcd, the underlying storage of the Kubernetes cluster. And then if you restore etcd, then you'll get the same UIDs back. But if you're just like creating a new cluster and then doing kubectl apply, then you're going to get new UIDs. And that's analogous to, I'd say, like if you're spinning up a new pipeline server and uploading new pipelines and pipeline versions, even if it's the same underlying YAML. So it's more cumbersome, I would say, to do a restore because you have state in two places. And that's unfortunate. And I don't think you can be very selective, I guess, of what you're backing up and restoring of etcd. It's probably an all or nothing thing. But so it is a concern if you're doing a backup and restore for that. But we'll just have to continue looking at the user experience of what that looks like, and see if we can find compromises of still making sure that the UID is meaningful and guaranteeing uniqueness and can't be tampered with, but also improving the user experience. So I can look into that some more.
Okay. Thanks for this, Matt. I think let's also continue the discussion in the CAP that Matt has so gracefully wrote out in much detail. Please provide your thoughts there. And if you have any concerns, point those out and what have you. So let me just share so we have other
Do we
topics.
have like just 1 minute for one more question?
Sorry?
Do we have just 1 minute for one more question? I just want to ask a few things to Matt. Yeah, I just
Sure.
I haven't like reviewed the entire proposal, but just have a few things like around like etcd, right? So I guess like the point is like we will really rely on etcd for storing those pipelines. So how reliable do we think it will be for the long term, right? Storing everything there and make sure it actually could work in different environments, right? Compared to using database that we supported in KFP.
Yeah, I think if you have stability issues with etcd, you've got worse problems because the whole cluster is down, and presumably you have Kubeflow pipelines stored on or running on a cluster. So I think that's definitely something that you have to spend a lot of time to make sure the cluster is reliable for that. I guess could you expand a little bit more on the question of
yeah, because I guess like the question is like, for example, we kind of like force everyone, back to Chen's point, like to use like etcd to store their pipelines metadata. So there is kind of like the close opportunity for folks to using, like some external storages for pipelines, right? Because I guess like today you can run API server outside of your Kubernetes environment, right? And make calls to
You
this,
could.
external API server. Yeah, good.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you. I think the word I would change is force because it is opt-in. So it's up to the administrator that's installing Kubeflow pipelines to decide how they want stored. It's not like we're deprecating the database solution, but I would say that like Tecton, for example, is another pipelines Kubernetes native project, and I haven't heard that being a particular issue. And I think the idea being that if you're storing these pipeline versions in Git for GitOps, there is a way to restore them as well if the cluster does come down or etcd has an issue. So I think there's the downside, of course, that the UIDs don't match and the UI experience is not so good because it can't map back to the actual pipeline version, even though the YAML's the same. But at least like you're not losing the data forever. But
Yeah. I guess like the UID could be an issue, right? Can you register with etcd the existing UID? Or it's not be possible?
no, not through the Kube API, auto generates
Okay.
it. So if you're backing up etcd and restoring etcd, then you would get the same UID. But if you're just recreating the pipeline version, then yeah, you would get a new UID.
Yeah, makes sense. And just let me yeah, go ahead. Man.
Well, I guess, yeah, maybe I'll bring it up here because it's been brought up a lot of time that people don't, or that there's concern around the UID. And so is it reasonable to add like an annotation or something like that on the pipeline version of the previous UID so that we can continue to map back if you are doing a restore? Because that would kind of make the UID not guaranteed unique anymore. Like,
Can I delegate this conversation to the KEB? Just because we have other
Sure.
topics to get to. I think these are very great discussion points. Let's
Okay.
raise them in the KEB. That's kind of the whole point of the KEB. So really appreciate everybody's excitement for this. Yeah, so let's take it to GitHub. The next topic is local setup errors. I don't have a name here. Do we have this individual who proposed this topic?
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Yeah, so let me just introduce myself. So myself is Milind. I am like new to this project and want to contribute to it. So yeah, so as for setup, local setup, I tried to set up the front end for the pipeline, and I came across this error while running through the commands given in the README file. So yeah, so I am getting the errors. Like I shared the Slack message in which I have shared the errors. So if anyone can help me to fix them, or like have any solution to this, if like I
So you have a Slack post for this, right? It's kind of hard to say
it
without
would be
looking
helpful
at
for me.
the error. It's looks like dependency issues. Yeah, I see you have some replies there. I don't know immediately what the issue is. I think if we can get some folks to help, is it Milind? Out.
Yeah, it's
There was.
Yeah, so this might not apply anymore, but when I was trying this a while ago, I recall I had to like go into the front end server directory and run like npm build, I think, npm run build, and then I was able to run the front end after that.
Yeah, I would ensure that you have like the right node version installed as well, and you're doing npm install, and making sure you're not getting any errors there before trying to run the server. Yeah. It's possible you might be just having node version issues.
No, I like in the README file it's saying Node 14.
Yeah,
So
we have to
it's-
update that. It's changed. Matt
Oh.
Matt updated it to node is it 22?
I think so.
Yeah, so we should really get on that. That's an action
Okay.
item. Matt, could you provide Milind with the right node version in that Slack thread? Node version is no longer 14. It has been updated. We need to update the relevant docs to match the version. Yeah, 14 is out of support and 18 is also out of support very soon. So we have updated it. I think there must be some lingering docs there that also yet need to be updated. So we'll get you the right node version there, Milind, and see if that resolves your issue.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
No worries. Dermot, he pinged me about this. He couldn't join the call. Chen, there's just a ask from Google side if you can take a look at the API amendments for this semaphore. We brought this up last time. Just take a look at like whether this makes sense, this entry. If not, if there's any like concerns around it, then we can raise those and address them accordingly. I don't know if you got that, Chen. That was
Yeah,
really-
sorry. Yeah,
Okay.
I think it looks good to me. Yeah, I'll
Okay.
review this.
Okay, yeah. So if you can just drop a comment, it'll unblock this. And we'll so that we have agreements from all sides and we can move forward with this. Okay. We are at time. We have 1 minute. Ricardo, I just wanted to like kind of sync up on where docs are land, like how are we managing? And Andre, you're here too. That's nice. Is there like right now, personally, I see somewhat of a headache with having to update the doc website like separately than on the Kubeflow pipelines. Is there like any resistance to if we keep like a copy of what docs we want to update in the website in the Kubeflow pipelines repository, and then for every release we would just copy them over? Or is this something we would want to like bring up in a broader forum?
So I was going to propose that for the next releases to have a better way to handle documentation changes, but I believe Andrew will confirm that as well. The nature of the working groups is to be independent from each other. So if you believe it's better for the pipelines working group to have their own set of documentation store in your own repo and then find a way to replicate this to the website, it's up to you. But yeah, I would like to work on a broader aspect on this because one of the biggest pain for the general Kubeflow community is that documentation is not that really good. So it's not a problem with just one working group, but it's the whole Kubeflow community problem. But I'd like to if Andrew has anything to say about this, it would be great.
Yeah, I mean, we just never have time, right, to finish it, Ricardo. Again, like I think I kind of explained my points before. I would love to get docs versioned by the individual components and then some sort of summarizing them on the, like global website, like similar to what Hugging Face is doing. I just don't know like if that is possible and achievable with Hugo, right? Because of course, like I guess like for KFP, for us, for many other, like projects, it will be much easier to maintain empty files within the repo, right?
Yeah.
But we just, yeah, good.
So like right now, it's less of a maintenance burden if every Kubeflow release at one point we just copy things over. If that is something, there's no resistance to that. Like we can maintain a copy of it right now in the Kubeflow pipelines. The biggest benefit is that we can request pull requests to have documentation changes within the pull request. This makes things a little bit more scalable. Like we can, rather than keeping track of what was merged and chasing down the same PR author and be like, hey, can you update the docs on this other location? keeping it in the same website, in the same repository would be a pretty big gain, and keeping docs up to date. And then before release, we can just copy it over until we come up with some longer term solution, some automated solution that will like pull these things. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I guess like, Ricardo, we just need someone who can volunteer and drive those discussions forward, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I'll see if I can at least start the cap that you just suggested to me, and I'll follow up with Valentina, who will take the release manager role for the upcoming release, and see if we can make progress on the discussion on the documentation changes. I believe this is one of the P1 requirements to make Kubeflow releases better.
Awesome. All right. Any other topics that were not listed on the agenda? We are over time, so I guess take those to Slack. Thank you everyone for joining. Remember this call is recorded and will be uploaded to the Kubeflow YouTube channel. And I'll see you guys in chat or next time. Take care.
Thanks, Amar.